Kia ora koutou, welcome back. Just to make sure we have got everybody back, I'm just going to ask Sandra to do a roll call. Thank you, Sandra.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Present.
Councillor Casey.
I'm here.
Councillor Collins. Councillor Coombe.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dalton.
Present.
Councillor Darby.
Yes.
Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Henderson. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora.
Councillor Mulholland.
Present.
Councillor Newman.
Present.
Councillor Sayers.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
I'm here, thanks.
Councillor Stewart. Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Young is an apology. I see Councillor Henderson.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Stewart, can you hear us?
Councillor Collins is on.
Thanks, Leslie. Yep, just joined.
That's all we have present at this point.
Okay, look, we'll get...
Kia ora, Your Worship. I'm not sure I have to keep reminding you that you've included me by resolution.
David, my apologies. Yes, we'll acknowledge you as present too. I think Sandra's already done that. Okay, just to give you an update on COVID-19, in case you were listening to the radio or weren't listening to the radio, 7 new confirmed cases, only one of those imported, but the 6 that are community transmitted, all linked to the Auckland cluster, 5 from households, 1 from a workplace, 1 is a student at Mount Albert Grammar, but he hasn't been at school. They've done pretty well, over 2,400 contacted of the 2,455 close contacts, and 10 in hospital, 2 in ICU. So a bit of a mixed bag there. We would otherwise have been back at level 2. So there is still a growth in the cluster, and it's already the biggest cluster. But there's no sign that it's going out of control, but it is still expanding. So we hope that by the time we get to the weekend, those numbers start to come down somewhat. Right, we still have a number of significant items on the agenda, and it's just after 1, so we'll try and make the progress that we can. The item number 11 is, again, in relation to the review panel recommendations, and it's the proposal to merge ATEED and RFA. I will move the recommendation, ask the chair of the CCO Oversight Committee, Bill Cashmore, to second it, please, Bill.
Yes, seconded, Mr. Mayor.
And today we have Sarah Johnson-Smith and Alistair Cameron to introduce the item. Again, we've workshopped this, we've expressed opinions on it. It may be that we can get through this a little quicker than the first and general set of recommendations from the review panel. So is it Sarah leading off or Alistair? Just check both of you there.
It's Sarah here, Your Worship. I'll lead off on that.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon everyone. I'm just checking you can all hear me clearly.
We can hear you loud and clear, thank you.
Great, perfect. Well, my report today builds from your discussion on agenda item 10 this morning and focuses on recommendation 1 of the panel's report, which is the proposal to merge two existing CCOs, ATEED and RFAL. And it also builds obviously on the workshop engagements you've had over the past few weeks to discuss the panel's recommendations. So, as you'll be aware, the panel concluded that the CCO model remains the right one for Auckland. However, in respect of ATEED and RFA, they noted similarities in the outcomes that both entities look to pursue. They heard concerns about duplication and a concern that the entities may be missing opportunities to achieve economies of scale. They heard through their feedback process concerns about the absence of a stadium strategy, but they also heard about the importance of economic development, especially now in the context of COVID-19 and Auckland's economic recovery. So the panel explored alternative options to the merger proposal. These included the status quo, looking at an option of some or all of these entities' activities coming in-house, but they didn't consider those viable. So the panel concluded that the merger provides for a maximum of efficiency, improved service delivery and value for money, particularly in a post-COVID context. In summary, the panel considered that the merger brings together two entities with more similarities than differences. It provides for a single entity with a logically complete set of functions and one point of reference for stakeholders and customers. It provides economies of scale and reduces duplications, and it's expected to produce ongoing cost savings in the order of 5 to 7 million annually. It enables a coordinated region-wide program of arts, sports, culture and business events, and it aligns to successful models that have been used in New Zealand and overseas. It enables better accountability and monitoring by reducing the number of CCOs from 5 to 4. And while not part of the decision today, the proposal provides opportunities to progress integration with other institutions and cultural organisations such as Eden Park, and Motet and the War Memorial Museum. However, these are recommendations to be considered at a later stage by Council as per your earlier report on the agenda. So as such, staff are recommending you agree the merger and that you write to the boards of ATEED and RFAL requesting that they undertake the merger and that you delegate the necessary steps to the Auckland Council Chief Executive to support the execution of the merger with the exclusion of board appointments to the new entity, the approval of a statement of intent for the merged entity and a name for the merged entity. And we'll come back to you over the coming months on those three aspects. So that concludes my quite short introduction, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Now, just draw your attention to a change that was recommended by Councillor Shane Henderson to recommendation F with respect to the fact that the salary for the Chief Executive of this new body shall not be higher than the salary amount of the Chief Executive of Auckland Council. I will accept that from the Chair if the seconder, Councillor Cashmore, approves. I've made it very clear that the CCO salaries, which are subsidiary bodies to the Council, ought not to be higher than the Chief Executive of Auckland Council. I have no objection to that. Bill Cashmore, are you happy to go along with that?
Yes, fine.
That's great. Could I also just draw to Councillor Casey's attention the last sentence in para 8 with respect to the Eden Park Trust Board and the museum, that decisions on those recommendations are not a matter for this report and will require future discussions with third parties and may require legislative change. So just to reinforce the point I made on the last item, Councillor, I will take questions and comments separately again. But as I said before, it may be that we don't need to debate this one at length because we've discussed it pretty thoroughly. So I do have a question in the name of Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I reserve my right to speak, but just a very quick question on point 57, which states the savings will offset the establishment costs of the merged entity. Now that's great, big fan of that. Do we have any estimates at the moment on what the cost will be to establish this new entity?
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. In terms of establishment costs, we expect that there will be some costs. They're likely to comprise some legal costs, etc., and maybe some tax advice, etc. But until we have the detail of the transition, we can't give a firm number on that. But it's been made very clear, Council's position, in respect of our current financial situation, that we're in the position of minimising costs, and that we need to realise those benefits ASAP. So while we will need to, as I said, provide for some legal costs in terms of advice to the boards independently, we expect these to be quantified in the sort of hundreds of thousands, and that these would be met within existing budgets, and they would be offset by day one savings.
Excellent news. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I've had a number of requests for comments, but no further questions. I'll just in case the technology has let us down again. Linda, actually, I have got one now. Councillor Linda Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was just in that instant, and apologies for lateness. I was on a call. So I may have missed this, and it is sort of alluded to in the report, but I guess I want to make sure that any new entity balances out all the functions, that we don't subsume some that are still necessary, and especially in terms of the expertise in managing facilities, which AT don't have that expertise, just as RFA don't have economic development expertise. But I guess for me, I want to know that we will still get all the functions and all with the skills to execute those very well in this new entity.
Thanks, Councillor Cooper. Yes, so obviously the proposal is very clear that it is a merger of the current functions and activities of both entities. So we're not gaining any functions, we're not losing any functions. So in that sense, the expertise that's associated with those will continue. The point about the balance of those activities across the merged entity as a whole, again, that will be something that the entity needs to manage, but again, that's something we would see partially mitigated through making sure we very carefully apply our levers as a council in terms of the direction that we set for the new entity, and hold it accountable. So again, through the statement of intent for the merged entity, our letters of expectation, and some of those other tools.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I just say that because we do own all the facilities, and if there's any dropping the ball in that department in terms of getting making sure we've got best revenue, highest and best use, but also managing those assets is really critical, and it cannot be subsumed to other functions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think that the savings that are being made will be in the duplication at the senior executive level and at the chief executive level and the board level, and we would continue, because the same functions are there, we would continue to employ the expertise of the people from both different CCOs. So, yeah, that would make sense. Councillor Pipacoon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Sarah. I don't need to make a comment later, but I just want to, by intro to this question, totally appreciate that that this is a big piece of work, and it's great to see that it's moving at pace. It is quite an aggressive timetable, and it's all about the substance of setting up the new entity. So in the scheme of that, the name is probably not, not top of the list of priorities, but I know the report says, sorry, I'm just trying to find where it is, but and Sarah, you just confirmed that the name is going to come back to us, but I just wondered if you could just clarify what you see as the process for landing on a name proposal, because one of the, it's been quite a big issue of the public being able to understand what RFA actually do and AT do, and we know that there's been this long-standing confusion between AT and AT. So I imagine both organisations really are looking forward to the new entity having a really strong name. And also just wanted to highlight that if I remember correctly, when the Panuku name was chosen. That wasn't really a very happy process because that wasn't the proposed full name, Te Reo name, and having it truncated has really confused what the meaning was intended to be. So I just wanted, so that's my question, Mr. Mayor. I don't need to make any further comment. I'm totally in support of this merger and it totally makes sense. But I would just like to understand the process for having by which we're going to land on a name for this new entity.
Maybe I'll take that one through the chair. I think your observations about the Panuku naming process are fair. We haven't quite landed what the process for developing the name for the new entity will be, other than it won't be the same process we followed with Panuku because that wasn't satisfactory. Look, at a very high level, I think the two entities, RFA and AT, will come up with some sort of a list of possible names that might work. We'll probably workshop them with the CCO Oversight Committee, and I dare say there'll be some engagement with mana whenua as well to get an appropriate name, but we haven't quite nailed that process yet.
Thank you. It's good to know that it's being thought through and there'll be mana whenua engagement. Thanks.
Thank you. David Taipere.
Kia ora, Your Worship. So just a question around my understanding is that with the merger there will be, for an interim period of up to 1 year possibly, that there will be 3 board members from each of the CCOs and a chair. And I know that for AT there are 2 Māori directors on there, but on RFA there are none. My question would be, what's the process for the appointment of that interim board, if I can call it that?
Through the chair, we'll be bringing a report to the Appointments and Performance Review Committee in the beginning of September. Because of the pace that this is happening, we would be looking to put in place a sort of establishment board, or a day one board, if you like, from current board members. We're looking at what skills and experience we'll need from across the 2 organisations to carry through to an interim board, and we'll take on board your comments when we come to that, but you as a member of that committee will be there for those decisions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Alf Filipina.
Thank you, Your Worship, and my question relates to, and I reserve my right to speak, Your Worship, but my question relates to number 87, Māori Impact Statement. Now, with that one there, the panel found that there were adequate mechanisms that compliance with the obligations to Māori, but they didn't. Then went on to say, however, the use of the mechanisms requires attention. Alistair or Claire, can you what mechanisms require the attention in regards to 87, and are some of the mechanisms listed in the sentence after that?
Through the chair, I think this is harking back to the report Claire brought previously to this. Just in general, I think the panel's findings in terms of accountability to Māori was that there was some confusion about relative roles, and there's sort of and this may not come as a surprise, a lot of different plans in place relating to different issues relating to Māori, and I think what the panel is getting at there is just a bit more clarity around which plans CCOs are expected to give effect to and who they're accountable to when they are giving effect to those plans.
Through the chair, it's Claire here. I just add to that those mechanisms and kind of that confusion are spelt out in the panel's recommendations 35 through to 40 in their report.
So will we, thank you, Claire and Alistair, so will we be getting back what we've done to address what is identified in 87?
Sorry, one of the awkward things about Skype is me and my team are not sure who's responding to it. I'll have a go. Yes, as part of the implementation of the CCO review as a whole, we'll be looking at the recommendations from the CCO review panel that Claire highlighted. So we'll be bringing back work on that.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll just wait in line for a comment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Richard Hills, question.
Yeah, thank you. And it's maybe a bit too broad, but my kind of question or my concern is, especially when or if we focus too much on the savings up front. Long term, yep, monetary savings are great, but for value for money, as Councillor Simpson always says, shouldn't be just the money. It's about doing things better and getting better outcomes. How do we ensure that short term we don't try and, especially during this COVID time, that we don't focus so much on the monetary savings and make sure we get the right outcomes? Like, are we sure we shouldn't be zipping the two boards together for a couple of months and then, then reduce it down to 6 members? Will we lose too much of the knowledge too fast? How are we going to ensure that we don't just replicate the ELTs but actually lose the expertise and the focus that each of those ELT members have in the different CCOs? How do we ensure that we don't just pull things apart just to quickly create a new structure, but we actually lose that long-term outcome, positive outcomes for all the different departments and parts of those two CCOs? So I just want to feel confident that we don't just run before we've walked through this, and then we focus too much on the yay, we've saved 5 million, when actually the outcomes for the city and the access to community related activity and all that sort of thing gets missed out of the way right now, especially if we start cutting a lot of jobs during a pandemic on top of what we've already are reducing things by. I just want to feel confident about that.
Councillor Hills, I can talk to that. Look, again, I'd make 2 points, a couple of points here, is that, as I said earlier, obviously we're looking at the same functions and activities continuing under this merged entity. And yes, while you may expect there may be some efficiencies at the board and perhaps executive level, one of the big advantages of this or forms part of the rationale here is that you're actually able to leverage the capability of the two existing organisations in terms of their various skill sets. So the other point I would make is that, and as the report outlines, we are looking at, while we are driving to a day one establishment date of the 1st of December, it is sort of seen as a two-stage process in terms of that initial establishment of the entity, but then there is that scope for ongoing refinement as we enter into LTP processes and going forward, where you may, there's an opportunity to refine focus or objectives as the council sees fit. So that's not only through the long-term plan process, but also through our various other accountability mechanisms, as I highlighted around the statement of intent and others. So yeah, again, I think because we are looking at maintaining current levels of service, current functions, current activities, you should see a retention of that strong capability and expertise that sits within both entities.
Okay, thank you. And I guess for you, Mayor Goff, just my question would be to ensure this is not our first mistake of the process of keeping not control of the operations, but to ensure that when we come December, January, February, that we kind of drop the ball. That's not really a question, probably more of a concern, that this is not our first show that we didn't keep our eye on what was going on or didn't, and everything goes pear-shaped. Not that that's quite a pessimistic view, but I just want to make sure that we don't let this kind of run a life of its own just for savings.
No, I think that's a fair point, and I think you'll find that with both of the CCOs, boards and chief executives being in favour of the move, they will have an input into the decisions that will be taken by council, and we would obviously be looking at agreement with the outgoing board chairs and CEOs, that we have got that ground covered, because as you say, we wouldn't want to drop the ball on it, and it's not all about saving money. It is about ending duplication. It is about using resources collectively so that you've got better economies of scale and better mass to actually do the job better. Those are the, value for money doesn't just mean cost cutting. It means using the money that you've got to the best effect possible. Okay, we've run out of questions unless anybody else had a question, so I'll move to comments, and the first request is Councillor Alfilipaina.
Thank you, Your Worship, and look, to start off, totally support the recommendations that are on the agenda paper. I do, however, just wanted to let the governing body know, and independent Māori statutory board member, that in regards to 31 on our paper, which relates to our cultural heritage organisations, and it's been noted in the Auckland Museum and MOTAT that the Cultural Heritage Institutions Review that we had, that was mentioned at a workshop, Your Worship, is that at this stage will be coming through to an extraordinary PACE committee on the 10th after the ECC committee meeting, and I think it's important that it does get mentioned in this particular one, because it's again a piece of work that we need to get to the end of. Also, Your Worship, if you on number 36, and it's been noted there that the panel's recommendation number 20 addresses the issue that they've noted in number 36, which relates to the unfunded our arts and culture strategic action plan Toi Whitiki. When this was put through the committee that I chaired a few years ago, Your Worship, we knew that funding was crucial for that particular strategic action plan, and we just haven't in the intervening years sort of assisted in that regard. But I know that Liz Civil's team is looking at a review of Toi Whitiki. So, Worship, for me, I just want to also acknowledge you in regards to having Matua David, the chair of the Independent Māori Statutory Board, on the governing body in regards to the previous item and this one, because I spoke to Ed and Alistair around where the Cultural Heritage Institutions Review would go to. And I pointed out that the PACE committee would be the right committee to go through as per the previous recommendation around it. And that then allowed us to consult with the Independent Māori Statutory Board, but also for them to be part of the Cultural Heritage Institutions. So, Your Worship, in my last comment, I also contacted the CEOs of ATED and RFA, and yes, you're right, they are both in favour of the move. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, very comprehensive report here that sort of unites the commentary around this theme of the fact that both these entities really focus on enriching the lives of Aucklanders. ATED in terms of economic development, tourism and events, and RFA arts, culture, entertainment and sport. So I think the way this report's been put together really makes this a bit something of a no-brainer for where we are now and in light of the review. And I'm certainly very much encouraged by the comments by the ATEED CEO in the attachment B in our report as it goes to the implications of the merger. I found them incredibly positive and upbeat. No, it's a real sort of can-do attitude, and I think, to be fair, that's characterised the initial discussions that have been between ATEED and RFA. So that's really encouraging. As are the financial implications, to be honest. No savings potentially of 5 to 7 million a year. Integration efficiencies, and conceivably quite big savings over that 10-year period, up to about $67 million. I guess my only concern, Mr. Mayor, or not concern, I guess emphasis on what's going to be important here on in after today really comes down to recommendations E and F. That's the board appointment process that will now occur, and the interim or permanent CEO, however that ends up panning out. And once again, I say that in respect of some of the very good guidance we've been given by the panel, by Miriam and Lee, in terms of the culture of the CCOs. And given that we're going into a new merged CCO here, I think it's incredibly important that we don't end up with a new merged CEO, but still retain some sort of delineation where you basically have ATEED and RFA in a merged CCO, but they kind of remain siloed off. That would be a totally counterproductive outcome. So I think the leadership here, both from the board and the CEO, is going to be absolutely crucial. The review panel have told us that the culture of the emerging CCOs, like any organisation, they're influenced by tangible elements, all the policies, procedures and whatnot, mechanisms that we commented on before, but the intangible ones, and I think it's going to be the intangible ones that emerge from those two processes and those recommendations, and particularly as they goes to values, expectations of the new entity, and the quality of leadership, not just at the top, but throughout it. So the people that are involved in that process, in the first instance, our appointments committee, and secondly, I see, Mr. Mayor, that it's going to be you and the CEO that are being recommended as providing some sort of guidance or input into the acting CEO. That's going to be incredibly important. And I think if we're looking for a bit of a guide on that, and again, this was referenced by Miriam, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. They make reference to this organisation in Glasgow, which is called Glasgow Life, which is a lot more encompassing than what we're proposing here in terms of the number of facilities that are taken under their umbrella. But in terms of the overall principle or approach, there's a lot of similarities. And if you look at the clear drive and leadership and culture that's exhibited in Glasgow Life in terms of the expectations of their communities, of their facilities, of their service to their city, to the residents of their city, it's absolutely outstanding. So that's actually not just a model for this emerging new CEO. It could go to all our CEOs and in fact the council as a whole. So I hope that reference is picked up by our officers. But in the wider implementation, I'm sure it is. I guess I'll just say finally that without going into too much detail, that this is clearly parts of the portfolios here are sensitive. They're highlighted in the review, and particularly as it goes to the stadiums. So it is going to take someone that looks at this afresh, enjoys the credibility, the confidence of all the parties. So again, that was going to be the leadership, and the direction of the board is going to be absolutely crucial in that. And I look forward to to some involvement or at least communication in terms of what the choices are that seem to be emerging there. I think that's going to be useful in the spirit of transparency. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 points. So firstly, in reference to my small suggested addition to the resolution, I had every confidence, of course, that this guidance would be followed anyway around salaries, but I suggested it as a small comfort to the many people that were concerned and submitted to us around CEO salary rates and submitted to us in droves, and so it's good that we're sending that small message to people. I'm happy to speak in support of this motion substantively. It's a good feeling to see this. I was going to say this is one of the suggestions that I'd made in my personal feedback, so that's cool. But as a new councillor, it's an even better feeling to note that everyone else kind of said the same thing. So it's good to be on the same wavelength with your wise and experienced selves. You know, this is wonderful. It's a solitary point of contact for our economic growth as a city in a desperate time, driving our recreation and fun and what makes life worth living in Auckland as well, and a chance for us in a few different areas. So in terms of governance boards, it's a chance to implement the CCO review recommendation for boards that look more like Auckland, with more diverse voices around that table. I would urge this merged entity to take all of Auckland with it and to treat as gospel the Prosperity Index report commissioned by ATEED 2 years ago, which suggested that parts of our city were being left behind. I will personally judge success of this entity not just on its impact to Auckland and events, management of stadia and institutions and the like, but its impact on local town centres and particularly in suburban Auckland. A strong partnership with bid teams is a must. Retail in the city is teetering on the brink of failure in so many places. I've seen that Office Max have just shut up shop, which is just the latest example. And leadership on the future of town centres is absolutely crucial for this entity. I look forward to seeing what's going to come out of it. And with this merger, I'm feeling more confident in success around this than before. And I'm just delighted to support it. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. IMSB Chair David Typery.
No, Your Worship, I've asked my questions and comments. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I had you down by mistake then. Councillor Daniel Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I want to say from the outset that, sorry, I'm getting some feedback there, that I agree with the proposal to emerge these CCOs. But there is no doubt in my mind that the real savings here will occur from what will happen following this, which will need to be a process of rationalisation around stadia and assets, and I think that is timely. I have to say that whilst I'm not a subject matter expert on ATEED, I think that ATEED has responded relatively well to the economic impact of COVID-19 and moved quickly to reorganise its functions as a facilitator for economic development and for tourism and event attraction. And I have confidence in Nick Hill and the team at ATEED. But I think that the CCO review, I think Miriam Dean, the panel, was quite clear with where this would eventually head in relation to a consolidated approach allows us to address the issue of stadia. And I think that is really, really important because I don't see how we can avoid the reality of a need to rationalise in the region now. And I think that this will be a very useful first step on the path to achieve that. Your Worship, you've made some comments recently in the media. I agree with them in relation to some of those really, really large contingent capital liabilities which need to be brought to a head. They need to be brought to a head as part of a coordinated, joined up approach to the management and operation of the stadia. along with Eden Park, and I think that we can achieve that with this being a useful first step. But I do want to acknowledge the executive leadership of both of the organisations, but to express in particular my confidence in the work that ATEED has been doing, and to indicate that I would expect that as part of this transition, that they will have a very strong role in the future direction of this new merged entity, understanding that following this we will need to have a venue development strategy that will actually look quite different to how we currently organise stadia and facilities in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Wayne Walker is the last call that I've received for speakers.
Thanks, Phil. So I'm entirely supportive of this approach. The immediate concern I've got is the urgency around the development of a stadium strategy and also an economic strategy, because both of those things will obviously inform what this merged entity is doing. The particular concern that I've raised before, and I'll raise it again, Phil, and I know that you're a bit cynical about it, and really that is the need for the government to have a national strategy around what might be termed national museums and also what might be termed national stadiums, because we know that Eden Park, for example, is a national stadium. I would suggest that far more so than any of the other stadiums, because it's the one that hosts the World Cups for New Zealand. And similarly, we know that the Auckland Museum has got a collection that ranks alongside Te Papa in terms of its national standing. Now, I know that there may be reluctance on the part of government to go there, but I would suggest that we still need to apply ourselves to that, because it is going to be a long-term funding issue. So I just want to put that up in terms of the work program for setting this up. And I guess the other issue that I just want to raise as it goes to this merge entity, and that follows on from the CCO review, is the need for more transparency, especially as it goes to stadiums, so that we can achieve that in order for the councillors to exercise their governance oversight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And as soon as I say the last speaker, somebody remembers that they wanted to speak on it. In this case, Councillor Chris Darby, you've got the last call.
Thank you, Mayor. Probably before your own, Mayor, which is good. Look, I think this is where we get into the meat of the CCO review, and it's good that we're getting there quickly. And I want to acknowledge all of us and our staff for taking us to this decision today in a timely way, because, look, we've got a lot of willingness on everybody's part to put these two together. Not the least being attachment B, where you can see the boards and the executive both joining up saying, definitely, we'll do this. And that's good to see. There's not a lot of difficulty in this merger, but there will be probably some hiccups along the way. Very different asset classes, not a lot of complexity there, but there's a big difference between the $1.5 billion in physical assets of RFA and the nil, almost, physical assets of ATEED. But the thing that I really want to stress here is we do need to do this quickly. We've got people on both sides of the CCOs, on RFA and at ATEED, who are probably wondering what our call's going to be. They need some certainty. These are our people that have given us tremendous service in both of the CCOs, and we owe it to our people to move quite briskly. The other priority here is that we need to then move on the board appointments, some questions about how we might go about doing that. I'm going to be mindful of the risk of the dilution of the range of competencies that we currently have on those two boards, particularly on the RFA side. You've got quite a range of competencies to deal with a bit more complexity on the RFA side, entertainment, stadia, cultural institutions, etc. And so I think we just need to just not assume that we're down to a 6-person board. Securing a CEO will be the next step there, but the next big priority that we need to launch into double quick time is confirming those strategies for stadia. To be honest, it's political handbrake on that. It's not been the responsibility of the CCO RFA itself. It's been political handbrake that's held us back on the stadia strategy. Economic development strategy, well, it's 8 years old, not relevant to this COVID world that we're in. And our councillor, Al Filipinos, recognised the importance of the cultural review. So I'll be watching the merger. I want to see possibly the cultural institutions and the cultural infrastructure starting to rise up, Mayor, rather than being subsumed. I think it's been a little bit subsumed by discussion about stadia over the last 3 years and our failure to arrive at something there. To their credit, RFA has got a lot of that right on the cultural infrastructure side. So let's elevate that going forward. That's the sort of stimulation that Aucklanders are dying to see more of. On the stadia strategy itself, we've been told for years there's $300 million in savings in that, and we are the ones that locked it out, and now's our opportunity to lock it in. We've also been reminded that there's some $700 million of renewals, backlog renewals, on the stadia side, and I think that might extend to some other parts of the RFA portfolio as well. So we've got work to do. But my plea as we go forward, members, is let's stop scratching the stadia scab. Every time it starts to heal up and we get some options, let's not scrape that away again and let it bleed. We've got to resolve the stadia strategy. And my absolute desire is, please, no more outrage mongering on the stadia. It's just not been a good look, and it is not serving us well, and it is costing us millions every month. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And in reply, and reasonably briefly, clearly there is a mood both in the wider public, amongst councillors, and even actually on the part of the two CCOs to actually allow this merger to go ahead. And I don't need to repeat the rationale for it. It's set out there for us. I do draw your attention to attachment A, where they did a pretty thorough job of looking at 4 different options. So they didn't pluck this out of the air. They looked at each of the alternatives and they said overwhelmingly the argument is for merger. Attachment B is also quite important because that is the joint work of both the Regional Facilities Auckland and ATEED in saying these are the things that have to be at our forefront as we move through this process. So it's not a case of dragging reluctant CCOs and vested interests within those CCOs to a goal that we think is important. It's a goal that I think overwhelmingly every stakeholder and submitter thought was really important. The pace of the change is really important to get this in place by the 1st of December. In just 3 months. It's a big ask, but it needs to be done, and there's a series of reasons why it needs to be done, but the most important of which is you don't want to leave people hanging out there not quite sure of what their future should be. We can do this. The two CCOs will work collaboratively with Council and we can get it done. Ironically, I think one of the biggest and most controversial issues will be the name, and you know, I just think of it this way. Auckland Transport, Watercare, we know absolutely what those organisations do because the name is self-evident. If I went out and asked 1,000 Aucklanders what RFA stood for or did, or ATEED, what the acronym stood for or did, maybe I'd get 10 or 20 people who'd give me an answer. So my strong suggestion is when we come up with a name, and it will be a challenge and we'll be the ones that decide this, let's try to make it reasonably self-evident as to what the function of the organisation is. The second part of what this merged organisation will do will arguably provide the biggest challenge, and that is how we get the strategies in place that we need. And Councillor Darby's mentioned them: the stadium strategy, culture and heritage strategy, and the economic development strategy. We need clear strategies, and we need to resolve it. The stadium strategy has been kicking around much longer than I've been on this council, and it's time that we looked at it, and we looked at it rationally. We know that we can't put hundreds of millions of dollars into the, I think Councillor Newman made the point very clearly, into the capital renewal liabilities that we have. It runs into hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We can't do that. We have to rationalise it. We need to do it. And I think the world has moved on, and some of the sporting codes will buy into that. The harder decision may be the one around the cultural institutions, and will need to be really strategic in how we go about that negotiation, particularly with the Auckland War Memorial Museum, not to lose any of the things that make that institution such an iconic institution, but to bring it into the wider fold so that we actually do have some decision-making power as a council. At the moment we don't, because there's separate pieces of legislation for ARAFA, for the museum and for MOTAT. So I think this is a good move. I think, once again, the views that I've heard in workshop and here have been unanimously for. So again, I'm not intending to put it by division unless requested. I'll put the resolution on the voices and then ask if there's any dissenting voice. So the recommendations are in front of you. We'll take them as a whole. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no, and please indicate if there's any dissenting voice. If not, I'll declare that passed unanimously. So thank you very much, councillors. We're now up to item 12 on the agenda, and that is the City Rail link and the approval that we need to give along with the Crown for a contract variation. Once again, we've workshopped this.